Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode 51, and today we are talking about configuration without YAML, and we're chatting with Zack. Zack, welcome to the podcast. We chatted a little bit before the podcast, but you've got a cool blog called Self-Hosted Home.
Yeah, so I was interested in all this home automation, but also just, hosting your own software, self-hosted apps and all that sort of stuff. So decided to make a little blog about it and try to, work through some problems and post solutions and look at home automation and all that sort of stuff.
Wicked. That's awesome.
It's really cool. Yeah. There's so much on your blog that we'll have to break down with you in a bit as well. But I'm really excited to pick your brains about how you're using Home Assistant and how your smart home's set up. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into that. Yeah.
Yeah, look forward to it.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabokasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So we should also just mention previously in the previous episode of our podcast, we had a little survey that we got everyone to complete. Just want to say a big shout out to everyone that took the time to fill out that survey. We're still going through all the responses, and then we'll make some changes. Thanks for all the feedback, both positive and negative. We really appreciate it as well. And also big shout out to everyone that volunteered and shared their Discord usernames. So we'll get in touch and hopefully we'll have some more interesting people to come on the podcast in the future too.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome to see how many people actually came and replied back to this. So thank you to everybody. And yeah, it is taking us, because we are actually reading through the responses and such. So it is taking us a little bit to get through it. So thank you. Anyways, in terms of what's new, so Paulus pinged me the other day actually and mentioned, hey, you might want to talk about this. So this is definitely something that's a little exciting. If you haven't played with it yet, it's out on the beta already, but they've been working on a new UI for Has Cloud to manage Google entities. And these Google entities actually only show entities that Google supports. So as in, if you're trying to get Google Assistant or Google Home to work with specific entities that are in Home Assistant, essentially there's a new UI that just has, that's basically got an on and off to say if you want Google Home to discover those entities. So that was, I actually played with it the other day. It was actually pretty neat. Works decently. I mean,
so is that from the configure? So when you've set up Nabokasa Cloud, you'll go in and you'll have, the option to enable Google Assistant and the Amazon Echo. Does that then extend? I think for my Amazon Echo, it has the devices that are exposed to her. Can you? So I'm guessing now for Google Assistant, you can actually go in and choose to remove those devices, or say, yes, I want this fan enabled in Google Assistant. I want this light to be shown in Google Assistant on a per entity basis.
Yeah, exactly. And instead of doing it through the YAML config, you're actually doing it through the UI.
Right.
Yeah, so it's, you've just got the little not the radio buttons, but the little switches to say on or off, and whatever you want you just set to on, and whatever you don't want you set to off.
And do you do this on your Home Assistant, your local Home Assistant, or do you do it through the Nabokasa website?
You do it through the local Home Assistant.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and also anything that needs a PIN to unlock. So let's say, for example, locks or the covers, so window covers, garage doors. You can disable 2FA for those if you need to, which only right now works for English. And then hopefully a little later they'll have some other languages there as well. So it's starting out with just English though.
Okay, similar to how Amazon likes to slowly release features per region, which I guess is similar to like they only release things in the US English as opposed to British English and
yeah, exactly.
So I'm guessing these sort of changes with the Google Assistant is sort of comes into play with some more changes that have come in with 0.94. Home Assistant starting to move the core configuration of Home Assistant away from YAML. So from 0.94, most of the core configuration can actually be stored in the storage folder. So this means that if you are installing Home Assistant for the first time, you can actually have a very basic setup of Home Assistant running without touching a line of YAML. And this is something that I think the team have mentioned that they want to get right when moving towards, and especially looking forward to version 1.0 of Home Assistant, is that, everyday users shouldn't have to need to know what YAML is or even touch YAML. So this will include settings, like your location, your metric units as opposed to kilograms or pounds. They'll actually be stored in the storage folder and can be all configured through the user interface. But if you were using Home Assistant before 0.94 and you have those settings in your YAML, they will actually override your the storage folder. So YAML is like the super way to do it, and it will override the user interface. But if you want to step out and start this new way and get rid of the YAML, you can remove that and then set it all up in the user interface itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's so I'm personally I'm a little torn, right? So somebody who is known and loved YAML since I've used Home Assistant, and it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, so the other day, so let's call it the last week or so, I've actually been trying to update my Home Assistant instance and just doing some other automations, things like that, using Lovelace more, or updating Lovelace and so on. And I still love YAML, but I was actually thinking to myself, like, okay, do I move everything to wherever I can? Do I move to the front end, right? So just remove the YAML and rebuild it in the front end. I don't know. It's to me, I'm still a little faster at YAML, I think, right? Rather than, because for me, it's a matter of, if I can't find something, Command F and blah, 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 right? Or Control F and just search for discovery, whatever it is. But, in the UI, maybe I'm a little slower, but I mean, I love the fact that we are going to, the more UI first approach, right? So I'm a little torn.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm kind of the same way. I enjoy kind of doing the YAML, but I've got more of a technical background, so it doesn't bother me as much. And I think if just in the, recently, the last 5-10 years, there's been kind of a DevOps movement where you treat your infrastructure as code. That was like a motto of DevOps. And if you think about your home automation platform as the infrastructure as your house, it's like, okay, this probably could be version controlled. You can treat it as real code. And I know it's just a configuration, but I don't know. I kind of like that methodology. And so I like the YAML stuff, but as long as it keeps being the golden source that overrides things in the UI, maybe that's okay, like in this case. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah. So I'm excited for the UI still. I love the fact that we're going UI first, because as much as I said what I just said, I want to be an average user more than a power user. I know that sounds really stupid, but it's supposed to be easy, right? And I think that's key. Yeah. So and I get it. YAML's not difficult. Personally, I think it took me probably about 10 minutes to get the gist. But it's also, but that's also because I do think technically. My brain is wired to do that, and if not everybody is, right, and if home automation has to hit kind of mass scale, and that needs to be front and forward, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I agree.
But on that note, so Home Assistant's actually going to have a new discovery engine. I'm sure if users of Home Assistant are familiar, it's got the Home Assistant itself has the ability to automatically discover devices on your network. So things like Google Cast and Philips Hue bulbs, that kind of thing. The underlying library used to be called NetDisco for it. And as of this release, so 0.94, it's starting to be phased out. And it's going to be replaced with a new library, right? So essentially what will happen is that allows more devices, more components to be discovered, and hopefully makes it a little easier in the future as well. Also, as you add things, so we were talking about the whole, moving UI first. when Home Assistant discovers something, it's not just going to add it in there. The UI will actually give you a notification saying, hey, do you want to add this? And then you have to actually approve it. So that's a great way of controlling what actually comes into Home Assistant, what doesn't, and so on. So certain components, things like Philips Hue, HomeKit, IKEA Attach Free. So those components have started migrating to this new library.
Yeah, so they're part of the new configuration that you'll have to add. So I think if you're using default config, which is that new setting that was added a few releases ago, that'll include it. But SSDP is the new library, and ZeroConf are the new libraries that are handling those configurations and auto discovery.
Yeah. So I mean, I actually think this is actually pretty cool. So I've always had issues with the old library working for me, essentially. Hopefully this is a little better, so I'll have to play with that.
And in this release, 0.94 is the first release that's going to start deprecating Python version 3.5.3. So as of August 1st, you will no longer be able to use that version of Python. So it's a good opportunity to start thinking about upgrading if you're still one of those users running an older version of Python, which I'm guessing is probably not that many, considering I think Home Assistant now has stats on the average users, on what version of Python they're using, and there's probably a security reason behind it as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a supportability reason behind it too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what's new outside of everything we just talked about? So automations and scripts that are created in the UI now can be deleted.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been a long-lasting request, I think, and it's here. So for everyone asking for it, congrats.
And device trackers, I actually didn't think this was, or I thought it would already been there, but device trackers are now getting upgraded. They can now have their entity IDs renamed, basically through the entity registry that Home Assistant's got. I thought this would have been one of those first components that have supported it for a long time, but no, apparently the device trackers were sort of left out of that movement. But now moving forward, you can now go into your Home Assistant UI and update the entity IDs of device trackers. So cool to see that that's getting some love.
Yeah, I learned that one the hard way last week.
So. Oh, no.
That it wasn't supported. So, IBM Watson, text-to-speech. So, if you're not familiar, IBM has the, it's essentially their cloud. I want to call it an AI platform. I think it is.
Yeah, I would say it is.
Yeah, so that's the platform that, was a contestant on Jeopardy and so on and so forth. So IBM Watson's text-to-speech engine is now supported in Home Assistant. So that's kind of cool.
Mm. I remember when Home Assistant didn't have that many like text-to-speech platforms. It may have even been only Google that was supported. And when Google they started restricting the Translate API and there had to be hacks to get around it, I really appreciate now that there's so many options for a text-to-speech component, just in case, one of them goes away or whatever you're using, there's now multiple options.
Yeah.
All right. Solax solar inverters. So they are now supported in Home Assistant. This is actually really cool if you've got solar panels. They can now be exposed with their Wi-Fi module to Home Assistant, and you can see the power production, your battery levels, and even how much power you're being fed back into the grid. So if you're a lucky person with solar panels and you have that inverter and you want to integrate it into Home Assistant, that'll be cool. There's some cool automations you could do as well. It's available. So those products are available in the US, UK, Ireland, and Australia. So that's cool. But I'm guessing if you're seeing, I'm feeding a lot of electricity back into the grid, maybe I'll turn the dishwasher on and use electricity for that instead. So yeah, some really cool automation ideas with that data.
Oh, that's awesome. And you can keep your, your energy provider honest too, right? Because there is a billing component to it typically, I don't know how every country is, but I know where I am. I as far as I know, I don't have panels, but as far as I know, when you give back to the grid, they pay you, right? So. Yeah.
You get a discount. Well, yeah, you never, at least here, they charge you more than what they'll pay you, like the put back in the system. So sometimes it might be more cost efficient for you to use electricity than give it back to the company.
Wow, that's unfortunate.
You could probably store this data too in, InfluxDB or one of those things.
Oh, definitely.
And view your, at certain parts of the year or parts of the day, when's your production's the best, and make some decisions based on that.
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Feed it into IBM Watson and get them to do some artificial intelligence onto it.
Yeah. That's right. Man, IBM should pay us. We're starting to just do sponsorships now. Anyways, the Azure Event Hub component. So you can now track Home Assistant events into Azure Event Hub. So similar in how InfluxDB, where you can export some of your Home Assistant history and put it into Influx, you can do the same thing with Azure Event Hub. It's kind of cool. So it's almost acting as a syslog collector, right? And where you can just dump all of your logs from HAS and say, hey, you know what? Here's all the events. Well, not logs, but event logs, right? And here's all the events that's happened, and then you can do whatever based on that, right? Build your own histograms or whatever.
So Ron, you've used a bit of Azure before. Is this something that you would consider moving over to?
Me personally, no. I would actually rather it be on Influx here, and yeah, like it's. I can see why people would want it there, right? If you have one repository for all of your stuff, yeah, makes sense, right? In my case, personally, that's not the case. I actually keep everything typically within Influx or something like that. And right now, I actually had to reset a bunch of stuff, so it's actually all natively wherever it is. So in Home Assistant's case, it's in Home Assistant. But yeah, no, nothing. I
think for maybe for people running on a Raspberry Pi where you don't want to run an Influx database, but you still want to get all this nice data somewhere, this is kind of a good stepping stone to running your own, InfluxDB database. It's like, okay, just dump it into this, this cloud service. And it's also, I don't know about for you guys, but like, I dump my stuff in InfluxDB, but it's not something I need that's like mission critical in terms of, so it's kind of, it's low risk to kind of use the cloud in this case, maybe to back up your data there, because it's not like, you probably don't have automations based off of this stuff. So yeah,
exactly. And like you said, it's in my case, I don't have that. Like, I'm not running Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi. I'm running it on, I guess, literally a physical server that I have from my lab, right? So it doesn't really, it doesn't make sense in every situation. But not to say it doesn't make sense at all, right? It definitely does make sense.
Speaking of Raspberry Pis, there's also a new ability in this release for the remote Raspberry Pi component. So if you've got sensors connected to a Raspberry Pi through the GPIO pins, you can now put that Raspberry Pi anywhere in your house and then use the Wi-Fi connection to remotely connect to those pins through Home Assistant. So this is actually a really cool little addition. I think there's going to be a lot of use cases for this. Actually, Zach, we were talking before offline that you've got your little presence for your chair using an ultrasonic sensor. I'm guessing that's using like a Raspberry Pi or something similar. Would you be able to like use this, like access that directly in Home Assistant now using those?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm using ESP 8266 Node MCU to control that ultrasonic sensor. I'd be reluctant to move it to a Raspberry Pi just because it's kind of nice that it's just a Node MCU and it's kind of a single purpose thing. I don't have to keep updated, and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about the SD card, failing or something like that. It's just a single use kind of thing. But this seems pretty interesting. Do you guys know how the interface happens? I mean, is it over MQTT, or how does it communicate with this other Raspberry Pi?
I'm not sure, like on the actual internals of it. So the Home Assistant component is literally just I believe there's a GPIO component for Home Assistant. From this release, all you have to do is you just set up your config the exact same way, and then you just add the MAC address of the Raspberry Pi. So that tells me it's got something to do with the the local network as opposed to MQTT.
Right.
So I'm guessing it will connect directly to the Pi based on that MAC address, probably over HTTP or something like that.
Okay, so there has to be something specific on this remote Raspberry Pi running. Like, does Home Assistant have to run
yes.
on the remote?
Yeah,
Okay.
there is actually. Yeah, there's some software that needs to be running.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and then that'll expose it to Home Assistant.
All right. On to some breaking changes. So there's some changes to the sun component. Essentially, the component itself is updating its attributes, like elevation and azimuth and such, every 30 seconds. So what that results in is, especially if you're using something like a Raspberry Pi, that's a lot of writes to your SD card or recorders databases, or really and recorder databases. So what's happening is, to kind of improve that a little bit, Home Assistant is only updating the sun attributes as it needs. So you're going down to 241 a day instead of 1,441 a day. So that's quite a bit of a drop, right? Which I totally get, and especially if you're not moving. I don't know if that really makes much of a difference why your elevation and azimuth would change, right? So yeah, there's a pull request by Penny Wood. So if you need any more explanation, because I did a pretty poor job of it right now, there's a fantastic one of it there in the actual pull request, which we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, actually went into a lot of detail on the reasoning behind and angles, sun angles, and all that. So definitely check it out if you're interested. But it may just, I think it'll be technically a breaking change, because if you're expecting that update every 30 seconds for the absolute minute minute of that angle changing, you might need to just make an account for that. But I think otherwise, this breaking change shouldn't affect too many. It'll just reduce the number of writes to an SD card.
Yeah. So I think that's great.
The Doorbird component has a few breaking changes this week. Monitored conditions is now deprecated, which is being replaced by Doorbird events. Tokens are now required on a per device basis. So if you're running multiple Doorbird cameras or doorbells, you'll need to have a token for each individual device. And the device schedules are now managed through the Doorbird app, because you're now having to use the events from Doorbird, and you won't be able to use them through Home Assistant. So if you are using the Doorbird component, there are some changes that you'll just need to make to your config before you upgrade.
And one that's I suspect it's gonna affect quite a few people would be Plex. So I did notice, though, it did fail pretty gracefully. So it gave me an error in the UI going, hey, you should probably change these things.
That's good.
Yeah, so I was actually like, hey, that's kind of cool. So conf include non-clients, so which is one of the attributes you can put in your configuration. That has been removed. So essentially, its purpose was to say, hey, do you want to include all Plex sessions and clients, or just the non-client ones? So
I think it was for like old TVs or apps that don't really support the native Plex API yet.
Exactly. So instead of this, now it's just trying to pull everything in. There's also a couple of others, use custom entity IDs and entity namespace, that have been removed. So by default, everything will be prefixed with Plex, just so you don't have any collisions in the entity names. Yeah,
that's good. I remember my living room Plex and my play bar from Sonos would always get conflicting entity IDs. As soon as I would restart Home Assistant, like they would try and grab the same entity ID. So, one, depending on which order got in first, either Plex would be assigned the first entity ID or the play bar would be, and they're completely different devices.
Yeah.
So, I remember when they added in that prefix, I was like, yes, thank you. But I think this is a good way to move forward.
Well, and I think it definitely makes a difference too, right? Now that they've moved over to kind of this entity database, essentially. So, I find that entity naming is a lot better nowadays.
Yes.
Rather than just being like Plex 1, right? And then, yeah.
All right, Zach. This is it. This is your time to shine. So first, I think let's start from the beginning. So we mentioned before that you have your own blog, but I think you're on the Home Assistant podcast. So when did you start using Home Assistant?
Yeah, I think I heard about it definitely a couple of years ago, but I hadn't really invested in too much home automation stuff yet. I had just kind of moved into my house, and I hadn't thought about it enough. Um, but I would say seriously, I got into it about a year ago. I had poked around with it a little bit before that, but running it day to day, yeah, probably about a year ago. And I had a coworker who had mentioned it before, and he knew I was a Python guy, and was just like doing these, running these kind of open source projects and looking at this kind of stuff. So he mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I need to go look into that again. So I think I just spent a weekend, got it up and running, and then slowly it grew over time.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Oh man. So how many folks do you have in your smart home?
Yeah, so it's just my wife and I, and then we have a 4-month-old son. So we got 2 dogs too, but so mostly it's my wife and I interacting with the home automation when we need to do something manual.
Yeah, your 4-month-old isn't like, hey Google, do this. Or...
not yet.
That's
not
funny.
yet.
No, that's.
Did you have to change your house much when the baby arrived?
Not so much, because I mean, we hadn't really done too much in the nursery area, so it's like that room there was nothing automated in that room, and we honestly haven't added too much in there since he's been around. But yeah, we didn't have to change too much. We did add we were looking at video monitors and all this sorts of stuff that people do with little babies, and so we ended up just getting a Ubiquiti PoE camera. And I just thought, might as well use a PoE camera and put it in his room. And then when we don't need it any there, I can just move it outside to somewhere more permanent, rather than some one-off baby monitor that, we don't end up using after a few years. So, yeah.
I think that's a smart decision.
Yeah, that's it's funny because it's the same thing, right? Your baby monitor is a camera at the end of the day. So why not just get a camera, right?
Yeah, I think some of the baby monitors do allow you to be a little bit more flexible with, moving it around the room and stuff.
Sure.
And you can do that obviously with some other, Wi-Fi based cameras. But yeah, we just put a PoE camera into the ceiling and thought, this has got pretty good coverage for his nursery. This should last us a while. Yeah,
absolutely. Until your kid turns 15, realizes that you used a camera instead of a baby monitor, and you're like, Dad, that's kind of weird.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I think we'll get moved out to the outside of the house.
Yeah.
Before too long, but yeah.
Pre-baby realizing that there's a camera watching while it sleeps. Yeah. Well, welcome to 2019. That's funny. So, what do you have? Do you have any way of primarily interacting with Home Assistant? Is it like, do you use voice, or do you use
So
the app or something?
We have some Google Mini devices. So we use the Google Voice Assistant, and we have Android phones too. So when we're doing something one-off, we typically go through the voice there. I pull up the Home Assistant UI on my phone every once in a while to do something, but in general, that's how we go about things. I think a lot of people have the opinion you should try to automate as much so you're not having to rely on those user interfaces, but which totally makes sense. But every once in a while, you got to do something that to interact with everything. So
override or whatever, right?
Yeah,
I get that.
So, Zach, you've got I'm sure you've got an amazing setup. So, how are you running Home Assistant? Are you using a Raspberry Pi? You must have a whole server rack back there.
I've got it's probably not as impressive as you think. I've got an old desktop computer, probably at least 10 years old, that I use to run Home Assistant and some other services just for the house. I started on the Raspberry Pi train like most people. Had an SD card failure at one point, bought a new SD card, was running on that for a while, was like, I have this other computer, I should really just migrate it over to that, and then spent a weekend getting everything running again, and was happy. So yeah.
So if you've got Home Assistant running on that, what else are you running to manage your smart home?
Yeah. So Home Assistant, InfluxDB, like we talked about, Grafana,
Yep.
Mosquito, all the kind of standard stack of Home Assistant related services. We have Plex running on there too, and I've got a Nginx reverse proxy set up so I can access all those things using a subdomain. And I don't know if y'all have heard of Bitwarden, the password management thing. So I just recently got that running there too. So just looking at different self-hosted stuff you can run on your own server, and it's been chugging along.
That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of these things don't take up too much, right? So especially if you're using an old machine from 10 years ago or whatever, it's not the biggest not the biggest deal.
And I'm running an Ubuntu Linux release, so it's pretty lightweight, and everything's in Docker containers, so it's pretty well isolated and easy to keep updated and manage. So
yeah,
I think it can be kind of a little intimidating at first for people who don't know about this stuff, but once you get it all running, it's pretty cool how flexible and easy it is to add more things, update things, remove things. That I think the Docker story is really nice for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it just for updating. I don't have to deal with it. Just Docker pull.
Yeah,
right? and you're done.
And if it really goes bad, you just change the version number back and
exactly.
kick it down the road. Yeah.
That's it.
So have you got anything that you want to add to that stack that you're planning on doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Nothing crazy right now. I've got a bunch of Z-Wave devices in my house, and I know there's like an open Z-Wave to MQTT service. I haven't tried that out yet or seen how well it performs, because I don't know if y'all use Z-Wave too much, but it is kind of a pain when you restart Home Assistant that you got to wait for your Z-Wave network to boot up and all this sorts of stuff. So
yeah. So today your Z-Wave stuff does run through Home Assistant, just I'm guessing on the Raspberry Pi or something. So.
No, I have a USB Z-Wave stick, the AOTech.
Yep.
It gets recommended all the time. So that's running that's plugged into my server, and I just pass it through the container. Yeah. So
cool.
Yeah. So going forward, I could look at running on a Raspberry Pi with this open Z-Wave to MQTT, and maybe putting it in a better location in the house too, because Z-Wave is this mesh network where you want to be close to the other devices, and my server is not in a centralized place. So that's another kind of advantage you could see with that, moving it to a centralized place and just exposing it over MQTT.
Yeah, because using the mesh network, I'm guessing that all your motion sensors are going to have to go through. Eventually, they're going to have to go through the same route. Like, so if your server room's at the back in the office, and the closest thing to that is a smart switch connected to your PC monitor, for example. Eventually, everything's going to get connected through that, and that's going to be like your single point of failure. And if there's no other route around it, you're going to get stuck. But moving it to a central point in the house, those sensors that are battery operated could potentially connect straight to the coordinator, which would make them a little bit faster as well.
Yeah, or just give them multiple routes to get back to the master node.
Yeah, it makes it more reliable, right? So
I had a problem this week with my Z-Wave network. I started off on the AOTech Z-Stick track as well. Yeah, that was fine. I found an absolute Open Z-Wave's fine. It's good in that it's open source and all that, but there are some devices where it just doesn't work where I'd like it to, where I was expecting it to. So I got home one day and the whole network was just done on that USB stick. So I was like, that's it. I'm moving to a Vera. So I've got a secondhand Vera Lite, and another reason was for those slow restart times. Now the Vera's on 24/7, and Home Assistant can just suck in the data from there. But this week I came home one night from work, and like half of the devices were just gone. So I would walk into like the bedroom, and there's no bedroom motion sensor connected to the Vera anymore. And I was like, you're joking. And like I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to go around and repair everything. I was almost about to, but luckily the Vera takes backups every 24 hours, and I managed to restore them.
Oh, cool.
From that. That was really lucky. But yeah, I started looking, all right, if I'm not have to repair everything, maybe I'll do something like Z-Wave to MQTT and just host it that way.
Yeah.
For the Vera, do you know if Home Assistant does it locally, or does it go through like some Vera cloud API to get?
Oh no, it's all local.
It's all local. Okay, that's good at least then. Yeah,
that's kind of neat.
And I believe it's it might be WebSocket based or long polling, something like that, because it's like it's not checking for a device. Like Home Assistant isn't dialing Vera every 30 seconds, have you updated something? So as soon as I walk into a room, there's a motion, like Home Assistant knows about it pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
That is neat. So Zach, what do you use at home? Like in terms of what components, are you using Hue? Are you in LifeX, or like what kind of stuff are you doing?
So yeah, I mean, I definitely have a fair amount of Z-Wave devices. So mostly smart switches.
Okay.
And I recently played with some an outdoor Z-Wave motion sensor and stuff like that. So I think lighting wise, I'm mostly on the Z-Wave train. For better or worse now. I think Z-Wave is one of those things where you it's almost like every product you have to really research a bit.
Yep.
Even though it all works together, but it seems like some devices work better than others.
Yeah. In theory, it all works together, right?
Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, I've got a decent amount of Z-Wave things. And then I like to, tinker with Node MCU stuff, and so I have some ESP Home based devices that I've built that talk to Home Assistant. From a camera point of view, I've gone the Ubiquiti camera route. I think they're a little bit more expensive than some of the other cameras, but I liked that you could run their NVR software self-hosted.
Yeah.
So
I think you can do it on a Docker container if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think they published the Docker container, but there is a Docker container out there that everybody runs.
Yeah,
so that's kind of nice.
Is that free?
Yeah, I
that's cool.
Yeah, totally.
I believe they sell an NVR, but I think the Docker container is you can just go grab it.
Yeah. Nice. Now, I think, too, though, that they're moving their next platform of NVR stuff. They haven't released that as a Docker container yet or made the software publicly available. But, yeah, historically, I think they've just released like a Debian package of the old NVR software, and someone made a Docker container out of it that, runs fine.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I've got a Roborock smart vacuum, which gets used all the time in terms of another component, but mostly Z-Wave for lights and things.
Yeah. That's cool.
Do you use the motion sensors inside for the lights?
I haven't done motion sensors inside yet. That's next step, I think. to get the lights even better.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things. Like you walk into a room and the lights just turn on.
Yeah. What motion sensors are you using?
So I've got the AOTech ones. I've got the original 4-in-1. They're the big round discs. They just do 4 sensors. And then I've got the smaller, the brand new one, the 6-in-1 multi-sensor, which is really tiny.
Okay.
The big one, the 4-in-1 sensor, takes AAA batteries, which is handy, but can also be powered through USB. I'm trying to slowly move them over to being powered where possible.
Yeah.
The newer 6-in-1 sensor uses that really, I think it's C2531 or something like that battery. They also claim 2 years battery life, but they have dialed down the reporting for like light levels and temperature down to once an hour.
Interesting.
So they claim 2 hours, but you only get those reports once an hour. And I use those sensors, especially the brightness level. I need to know if the room's already bright because it's sunny, like don't turn the lights on. But, once against the sunset, I can't wait an hour for that update to come through.
Right.
So, yeah. So those sensors are fine. Once again, they're connected to the Vera, so pretty smart, pretty fast. As soon as you walk into a room, there might be a 1 or 2 second delay before the lights turn on, but generally, they're fine.
Yeah, and I've seen someone, I remember a while back on the Home Assistant subreddit, who used a PoE switch to run a PoE cable to their ceiling, and then had like a little converter to 5 volts for power sensor. So
Yeah.
Yeah, because all those sensors are just like USB powered. So yeah, that would be easy to do.
Yeah. You just got to make sure you don't short anything accidentally, and you're fine.
And I don't know if the do you know if those Z-Wave devices act as repeaters then when they're powered like that, or?
Yeah, so when they're powered via USB, they will act as repeaters. But if they're battery, then no, they won't.
Yeah.
Right, which makes sense because you don't want the battery to just constantly be getting drained by acting as a mesh, right? So very cool. So Zach, you mentioned you have a 4-month-old. Sorry, have you done any automations around him, or are you planning to, or
nothing crazy yet. I mean, we have some kind of accent lighting in his nursery so that when my wife or I go in the middle of the night, we don't have the full lights on. We have kind of some dimmed lights. But nothing too crazy yet. Like I said, the camera is in his nursery, and I have a little post on my blog about using a Raspberry Pi just as an RTSP viewer.
Yep.
So you hook up the Raspberry Pi to your TV, and you give it the list of RTSP streams. And so it's kind of convenient sometimes, is when my wife's back there, trying to put him to sleep. I can kind of just turn on the TV to a specific HDMI input and, check out, is he asleep yet? Is she going to be coming up soon? Or should I go back there and help her, kind of thing. So
yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. So I love that. It's very practical in terms of how you use it, right? So neat.
And so you've done like a lot of projects with your ESP826s. Tell me about your sprinkler.
Yeah, so this was something I just kind of wrapped up. And basically, I was in the, market to get a smart sprinkler system, and looked around, and obviously there's actually a good amount of choices for that kind of thing. But just thinking about it, you really don't need something too crazy if you're planning on using Home Assistant. So just use an ESP Node MCU, and an 8-channel relay, and a little shift register to give more I/O pins to the Node MCU, and it just uses ESP Home to communicate with Home Assistant. And then I planned on with that you can improve the automation as much as you want in terms of when to water your yard. If you want to do it twice a week, for 30 minutes or whatever, you can do that. But then you can pull in all this nice weather data from Home Assistant to really fine tune when you want to water. If it rained an inch yesterday, don't water today, kinds of things. So I've got a little bit of that right now. It's definitely something I want to improve. But the sprinkler system works really well. It's just an ESP with a relay.
So is Home Assistant the brains for that sprinkler then? So when you mentioned it can do, like the, turn on the sprinklers for this amount of time, does Home Assistant control that, or does the ESP do that itself?
Yeah, so I for most of my projects, I really try to keep the logic on the individual devices as simple as possible. So it's like what you're saying, all of the logic is on Home Assistant to turn it on for 30 minutes and then turn it off.
Right.
If I want to change that timing, I don't want to have to reflash the firmware on the ESP just to do something like that. So it's all scheduled from Home Assistant. I know someone commented on the blog about, you should probably add a max duration hard-coded into the ESP firmware in case, Wi-Fi cuts out in the middle of a sprinkler session. And it never gets the turn off command. You don't want to be
that's what
watering your yard all day. So that's definitely some good feedback. But in general, the Home Assistant is in charge of scheduling the watering.
And is the communication between the sprinklers and Home Assistant two-way? So, for example, if for whatever reason that module turns the sprinklers on, does it then say to Home Assistant, "Hey, I've just turned this relay on, so now the sprinklers are running"?
Yeah, so it's using the ESP Home integration between the Node MCU and the Home Assistant, so it's pretty bidirectional. I don't have any manual controls on the sprinkler controller, so there's no way to actually turn it on without going through Home Assistant, which would be something good to add, just down the road. I think it'd be nice to also add like a little LCD screen that just shows, hey, zone 1 is running right now or something like that. But yeah, it's all, bidirectional right now, just using the ESP Home stuff.
Nice.
That's very cool.
I'm guessing you've got the Raspberry Pi and all that outside somewhere, like in a box near the sprinkler, like where the water's coming out of and all that to control everything.
Well, I just had an old sprinkler controller already.
Right.
In my garage, that had all the wires coming into it already sitting there in my garage. So I just took that off the wall and wired each zone, because there's basically a wire for each zone, right, of your system.
Yeah.
So I just wired that into each channel of the relay board, so that I could control each one individually. So it's a lot simpler than you would think. It's really just a relay controlling, which zone wants to be on at any time.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, have you run into any constraints about power and things like that? Like where your box is relative to power, or did you just like say, hey, my outlet's over here, so I'm just gonna put all this stuff over here?
The existing sprinkler controller already was powered. It runs off 24 volts AC.
Yeah.
So I did have to convert that down to 5 volts DC to run the Node MCU.
Yeah.
And the relays and stuff, but power wasn't a big issue there, just because there was already an outlet right next to where the existing wires were all coming into. So
okay, so that was convenient. Do you think in theory it's possible to run it off of? Because sometimes it's like, hey, I don't want to call an electrician to. Well, okay, let me put it this way. More selfishly, because I was actually looking at your post not that long ago, and I was like, I kind of want to do this, and because I'm thinking of putting a sprinkler system out, and so it's like, if I can't get to it, in theory, is it possible to use like a LiPo battery or something like that? And
so do you have an existing sprinkler system yet? Okay,
I don't know.
Yeah, I think the thing is all the sprinkler valves, at least in my system, are all 24 volts AC that have to be turned on, right, so that water will actually go through them.
Right.
So, throughout your yard, you have all these valves, and they all, in my case, all come back to my garage to be controlled there.
So they do need to go back to some. Yeah. See, I know nothing about sprinklers.
Yeah, you have to actually control to turn on the sprinkler valve that's out sitting in your yard. You need 24 volts AC. So
got it.
You're going to have power, no matter what.
And that's for the mechanism that makes it like pop up or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding from
fair
working on it. Yeah.
Okay. So when you had to convert the power down to 5 volts, did you split it? So like the 24 volts would remain where the solenoids go to control the water flow. And then, okay. Yeah. Fancy.
That is cool. Yeah.
It was a fun little project. And the thing I liked about it too was, if you, for whatever reason, if you have 16 zones, those sprinkler controllers can get pretty expensive if you start looking at the Rainbirds and Rocky O's and all those guys. Whereas this is, you buy another 8-channel relay board for $15 or something, and another shift register, and you've got access to, 16 zones now. So if you've got, a bunch of land or, more industrial setup, you could definitely make use of it. It's very scalable.
That's very cool. That's good to know. It's
in terms of the solenoid locations, where are they? Like, are they in the garage, like there? Like, does all the water go to the garage, or are they out somewhere in the garden where the garden beds are, and they have the valves out there to be switched over? I'm just thinking, like, how much cable is required to run out in terms of electricity to tell each zone to turn on or off.
Yeah. So my house was built in the 70s, and so maybe it's different now. I have no idea when they put in the irrigation system, but yeah, everything is pretty much around the yard. So we have these boxes in the yard that have a cover that if you dig up, you'll see a bunch of valves and wired together and stuff like that. And then all that comes back to the garage. So you just have your controller sitting in the garage.
Right. Okay.
And I think they use, it's 24 volts AC, and I think they use AC just because you're running over a long.
Yeah, that was my thought.
So,
yeah. Because you don't want to have to suffer too much voltage drop if it's a really long run out somewhere.
So I think it's pretty typical to use 24 volts AC for all these sprinkler valves.
Oh man, this is how I'm going to end up spending more money.
Yeah,
because
go do it.
I was actually talking to a friend yesterday, and I was like, I'm thinking of doing this whole sprinkler thing because I want to redo my backyard and put a patio in and that kind of stuff. I was like, I was thinking of doing this thing. And he's like, oh man, if something gets spoiled, it's so expensive, blah blah blah, and it's like. I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. Now I'm like, okay, now I kind of want to do this again.
Yeah, I guess for you, since you don't have an existing system.
Yeah, well, it's going to be expensive because I got to dig up and pay for the thing, right? Even if I do it myself, it's a lot of work to put it in. So it's like,
luckily mine was all working and ready to go. I just wanted a new smart controller. I had an old, controller-based, timer-based controller that I had no access to that, I wanted to replace.
I know. I've just had a brilliant idea. Like, Rohan, if you're going to redo your patio out the back, I don't know if they sell it. Like, how hot are your summers? Like, are you outside?
It can get hot. Like, I mean, on average, I'd say the higher side of things, at least where I am, is probably about 35 on like the hotter days. I mean, it does go up 1 or 2 days to like 40, 45, but that's atypical, I think, right? More commonly, it's around, on average, it'll be somewhere between 25 to 35, let's call it. Celsius, not Fahrenheit, sorry.
Yeah, so because obviously we get, hot summers here in Australia, so I don't know if they may have them over there in Canada, but so in our local hardware store there, we have these outdoor terrace sprinklers that you can put in your roof, and they claim that they can drop the temperature, outside by a few degrees. So you could easily put them up in your brand new patio area outside and then have them automated through a little ESP system, right? So if the if someone's outside and the temperatures are over a certain temperature, just turn those sprinklers on, cool everything down, everyone gets spritzed. It would be the ultimate, or you could even hook it up to Google Home or something. Hey Google, turn on the sprinklers out here, I'm hot.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
We have a little patio area that's got, the previous owners had put up some almost like PVC pipe for misting. It looked nicer than PVC pipe, but it's basically along the roof line where the gutters are.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
We haven't used it that much. From what happens to us is we have a hose that can just hook up to it, right? You turn on the hose and now the water goes through the misters, but the pressure is too low that you kind of get drenched.
Oh, So it's less of a mist, more of a drip.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there are, you can buy these pressure pumps to up the pressure so that you can actually get a finer mist and get cooled down more efficiently. But haven't played with that yet.
Oh, that's see, now thanks, Phil. Now I got to spend more money. It's I know exactly what you're talking about.
Why don't you automate a little water feature, like a little water pump,
like a little fountain or something?
Yeah.
I was thinking that. I don't know if my backyard's big enough for that. I thought about it. It did cross my mind, but I was like, okay, because then at that point now I got to expand what I'm doing, and that's money.
Yeah.
But it's and again, like I said, it's I don't know, maybe it's just me and my perception, but I feel like your backyard needs to be a certain size before you could do things like a fountain or something like that. I guess it doesn't have to,
I'm not talking like the Palace of Versailles here.
No.
A modest drip,
Yeah. That's not a bad idea.
Put an outdoor speaker out there and have some Zen music playing.
Yes, my own little temple.
Exactly. There you go.
I love it. Yeah, maybe.
Home Assistant can detect when you're stressed out using some
Yeah, you got to get one of those, the connected, like, they're not connected, but they're like mood rings or whatever, which like change colors depending on how you're doing. Just get like a light sensor that says, hey, it's red. So, okay, here's some Zen music or whatever. That's funny. All right. I think that's about it. I mean, Zack, I know I've been on your blog a little bit and, just reading around and that kind of stuff. And it's awesome. So thank you for putting all that information out there. And you seem to be blogging more regularly than I have. So also kudos to you for that. But yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. So we'll leave the links and stuff in the show notes. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for taking the time out, Zach. We appreciate it. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.